Hey folks, warrior poets are lovers of truth and we're lovers of people and we're defenders of both. Now, for lovers of truth, a lot of you guys, when I go on some tirade like this little rant I'm about to go on, you comment in the sections, hey man, stick to guns, show us how to shoot fast, and I'm glad that you're here for that. I got a lot of videos on that, but on that request, I'd be like, no, this stuff's more important. You may not want to hear it, you may not like going through it, but this stuff's really important to the heart of a warrior, the mind of a warrior. There's a quote that has been thrown around a lot lately. It's by John Steinbeck, and he says, the final weapon is the mind, all else is supplemental. I think that's awesome. The soldier, to be pure in their cause, ready to fight for something that they emphatically believe in and that truth, and ready to die for it, needs to be a philosopher of sorts. It's not okay to just kind of drift through, to be fascinated and good with guns. We got to have the will to fight. Because if we're just getting good at guns and tactics and stuff and we don't have that goodwill to fight, it's really just more of a hobby, because when the fear and the chaos ensues, you won't be able to conjure up that fighter mindset ready to die for a cause that you believe in. So we got to get these questions right. Now, I turn our attention to my generation. I'm the millennial generation. I'm the oldest of the millennials, so I can kind of see the generation before, but I'm also really endowed with a whole lot of the negative aspects of my generation. My generation is in large part very, very worthless, especially from an education standpoint. And I kind of recoil from, even when I say that, I'm just kind of like, but I think it's true. Even the word philosophy, when I say it, a lot of you guys, eyes roll back in your heads and you're kind of like, you get a picture of old dudes all dressed up sitting around in, lazy boy chairs smoking Gandalf the Grey pipes with nothing better to do than just contemplate, little sophist type mysteries, wasting time. But it's kind of a subject reserved for academics, and that's not true at all. That's terrible thinking. Philosophy is just kind of a catch-all word that has to do with how you see the whole world around you and how all the pieces fit. What is true truth? That's your philosophy. How does science and theology and history and experience all kind of cascade and gel together to determine what is truth? And everyone's got philosophy, but some of our philosophies are terrible. Philosophy is kind of the big subject that all the other disciplines have to go through to arrive at themselves. So you can't do science without a philosophy of science. You can't do history without a philosophy of history. So anyway, it's really important. I want to start kind of with a story. My very first philosophy class in college, I came up pretty disappointed. I wasn't really excited about that subject. It was a bit of a more typical college student. I was fresh out of the military, though, so I guess I wasn't too typical. I was more mature in my thinking, and I had a bit of experience under my belt as well to help me process the world and give me, perspective. But regardless, day one, a round-faced lady, pretty jovial, I generally liked her as much as you can like a philosophy professor who's making you do a bunch of work you don't want to do. Anyway, I guess I was let down because I was interested in really understanding what's true truth. And I thought I was going to be guided into understanding deeper mysteries. But a lot of philosophy classes aren't really philosophy classes. They're history of philosophy classes. And so this lady, just day after day after day, would bring about all these different philosophical systems. And she'd get us all confused and battling it out, and she'd kind of chuckle at the class's confusion, and then we'd go on to the next thing. And so I was one of the only ones in the class that was really pressing her. I'm kind of like, yeah, but what do you believe? And she didn't have anything. And I'm sure the school possibly wouldn't have let her come out, but I really became convinced, just reading through the lines, that anything was fine with her. I don't think she had a real set truth that she believed in. I didn't see passion in her eyes. She wasn't a philosopher, say, like Socrates, who would devote himself. This is the ancient Socrates, and there's a famous painting of him holding up hemlock, and he's about to drink death sentence upon himself because he was ready to die for what he believed was truth, and he would refuse to keep speaking about what he believed true even unto death. And I'm like, that's a philosopher, somebody who's after truth, asking hard questions, and really lives in conviction by that truth. That's a philosopher. And this is a really cool thing right here, but to really understand our present, you can't understand the present without understanding the past as well. This is really important, guys, even if you fail to understand how. From the 2nd century, or even from the 1st century up into the 17th century, the philosophical system was all built around kind of a theology, and that was God says. God says. And so that really defined what the center of truth was. From the 17th century, though, to say the 18th century, it's like 1648 to 1789, would really mark what a lot of historians will call the Enlightenment period. Was a time of discovery and all these casting off of, now it isn't what God says, it's what reason says. And a lot of people were welcoming that. They wanted to throw off the shackles of superstitious religious thought, which could be so bloody, over the centuries. And so they were ready to let reason guide them. And so all these philosophical systems were picked up and trying to make sense of all the world around them. And really, by and large, the Enlightenment was a philosophical failure. We know that because the Enlightenment came and went, and it didn't produce a good philosophy where all things of how to process the world, of how can we understand the natural sciences, and how can we also understand how morality plays in, and free will, and love, and purpose. And so the empiricists, the naturalists, the rationalists, and whatever ists you can come up with, they were these packaged systems designed to make sense of the entire world around us. And it failed to do that. So afterwards came the modern era. Was a time where they were saying, okay, we don't want God says, just God says to be the standard of truth to base all our philosophy off, because there is a God or there isn't a God. And we don't want reason alone to do it, because there's a lot that reason alone can't bring us to. You notice Sherlock Holmes, kind of the superhero of the Enlightenment, was a miserable guy. Even in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's fictitious depictions of him, he had a good kind of overall character drawing, because somebody who, with the presuppositions of Sherlock Holmes, is destined to be miserable, drifting in a sea of moral ambiguity, to be purposeless, and to really see life is a bit of a sham and in the theater of the absurd. I know a lot of you guys aren't going to agree with this. You don't have to agree, which is cool. That's discussion. So maybe something I'll say, something from all the stuff I've read, will spur different thoughts on it. At least we're thinking deeply, and we can enter into good, respectful conversation. So that's good. Anyway, the modern era says, hey, it's not by God alone, it's not by reason alone. Instead, it's by perhaps we'll come to a holistic truth, and the arts will guide us. And so you see lots of experimentation in painting and poetry, and somehow that's going to pull all the pieces together. The modern era failed to produce a philosophy as well. And so we went from God says to reason says to what is truth and how can we arrive at it in the modern era, to the postmodern era that says, you know what, there must not be a truth. You get to define what that truth is. And now, and this kind of took off in the 1900s, kind of 1950-ish on. This was the postmodern era where truth becomes relative. Morality becomes relative. You believe something is true and somebody else believes something that's completely antithetical is true. You're both right. Yeah, that's horrible. That's not philosophy at all. That's not a pulling together of the pieces. That's a destruction of all the pieces. And this is my generation's viewpoint. We don't believe in absolute truth. It's like 2 + 2 = 4. That's your truth, but to me it might equal 5. Now, banks won't play that way. Your professors of mathematics won't play that way. You have that line of thinking in your job, and you're not going to be able to make it. But a lot of times when it comes to morality and God, the questions that really matter, all of a sudden, though 2 + 2 = 4, in all the other areas of our lives, on the important stuff, truth is relative. And you have your truth, and let's be politically correct. And this type of thinking is very, very dangerous. I think it's intellectually bankrupt. I'm tired of this philosophy because it's not even a philosophy, it's an anti-philosophy. And so a lot of philosophy professors in colleges that are promulgating this kind of idea that truth is relative isn't a philosopher at all. They're an anti-philosopher. They're destroying truth. They're not making the pieces fit. And I know this is a bit of a rant, but see, if you get this question wrong, everything else is going to be wrong. This is kind of a root that everything else grows from. Now, the best thing we can do about it is read. Before, even in the Middle Ages, in the Scholastic era, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, philosophy was something that was taught. It was taught to little kids. This was a core subject. You get philosophy and theology and grammar and rhetoric, and you'd learn these key subjects. Now philosophy isn't taught in high school, and even if it is, which is very rare, it's taught as kind of a survey. It's a history of philosophy, and when it's taught in college, a lot of times you'll have my experience as well, which means we're not producing people with a true education in terms of how to think and process the world around you. A lot of folks in liberal universities and in major cities think in terms of moral relativism. 2 plus 2, it may equal 4, it may not. Maybe reason can't even be trusted. And this is a self-defeating argument. This is terrible, terrible stuff. 2 plus 2 equals 4 always. Always. Doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or South America or Asia. It always equals 4. Even in outer space or the farthest reaches of the galaxy, 2 plus 2, it always equals 4. If that weren't true, our satellites wouldn't work in space. There is absolute truth. You can defeat some people who would say there isn't an absolute truth by saying, hey, is there absolute truth? And they'll say, no, I don't believe so. And then you can say, are you absolutely sure there's not absolute truth? And if they say, yes, I'm absolutely sure, then there's one absolute truth, at least, that there is no absolute truth. So it's a self-defeating, contradictory argument. Of course there's absolute truth. Truth is narrow by definition. You are watching me right now speaking to you. I am on your computer or I am not on your computer or on your phone. There is a God or there is not a God. There is a morality or there is not, and it's a fabrication. You have an exact number of hairs on your head, not one less, not one more. That is just the nature of it. In truth, because it is exclusive, it doesn't care how intolerant or politically incorrect that is. It's just truth. And so you think of all the different subjects in the news and issues of morality, issues of religion. Listen, either all religions are wrong or one religion is right and the others are wrong. But you can't have all religions be right. What if my religion says your religion is wrong? Is mine right? And for the moral relativist, the person who says all religions are right and we're all talking about the same thing, what happens when they disagree and says, my religion says your religion is wrong. Is mine right? And you have to say yes. And again, it's a self-defeating argument. Guys, truth is narrow. And if you're of my generation, listen to me. Dismiss this bankrupt postmodern philosophy, this garbage of moral relativism and of relativistic truth. It's just not true. And in the ages to come, I hope this will be shrugged off and dismissed as just academically reprehensible. Hope this is helpful for you guys. Sorry about the little bit of rant. I guess I'm not sorry. I'm sorry if it hurt, but hope it will be edifying for you. Thanks for staying tuned, guys. Take it easy.